Welcome to God with George Ortega and Joshua Bond. This is episode number 16. We're recording it on Monday, November 9th, 2020 at 2:56 p.m. Eastern Time. This is going to be the first of a series on God and politics. Basically so much is going on. We've got this pandemic raging. We've got this economic, we've got many problems. I mean, this is, in addition to this, we've got the climate change problem. And the idea is that we're in a time, a political time, where I believe we can force both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to do the will of the people, to do the will of God. So we're going to explore, how to do this, but how to bring God into this, how to how God relates to all this. So, and we're just this isn't a prepared show. We know what we're going to say yet and all, but we're going to just cover this in various ways that relate to God to empower us. Again, we need to change our world. And I think changing it through God, through connecting it very closely to our understanding of God and our relationship with God will allow us to do this. Okay, Joshua, start us off.
All right. So the last episode, we talked about evil. The episode before that, we talked about consciousness and what is that and how does that affect our understanding of what God is, right? And so this episode with politics. Now, there seems to be a bridge between God and politics, right? And I think that's religion. So you could kind of consider politics and religion as both forms of culture. They both have their own culture. Whatever religion you're in, it has its own culture, its own customs, its own ideology, its own rituals, its own beliefs, right? Even its own dogma. Same thing for politics. And, a lot of people believe we have separation of church and state, but we only have two churches you're allowed to join in the political realm. You can either be a Republican and vote Republican, or you can be a Democrat and vote Democrat, And so you can kind of view this as a forced religion. And I think there's a lot of trauma. I think we're all experiencing a whole lot of trauma because of, these forced religions. Imagine if there was, imagine if the president came out tomorrow and said, okay, from now on in the United States, we're only going to allow these two religions, right? And you have to join one or the other. And you have to join one, you have to believe in it, you have to follow it, and you have to worship it. And you have to talk about it when you get together. And that's your only two choices, right? We wouldn't stand for that. That's complete nonsense, right? But yet we do that with these. And so we end up choosing from the lesser of two evils, essentially.
Yeah, but the problem, Josh, is we haven't reached that state, right? In other words, they allow religions, but you and I were talking about this before this show. In other words, the politicians are not the moral conscience of this world. Neither are the businesses, the corporations. The moral conscience of this world are the religions, the congregations, and essentially we were talking about now here's what a lot of people don't realize or don't appreciate. Basically, the religious leaders will refuse to talk about the issues that matter, like climate change and abortion and Black Lives Matter and inequity, economic inequity. They refuse to talk about this because they are political issues. And these congregations, these religious leaders know that if they begin to talk about these issues, to basically bring morality into it and talk to the people about what the politicians and corporations are not saying, these religious congregations would lose their tax exempt status. So basically the government pays them off to remain silent and not say what needs to be said about what's going on. And the congregations are complicit, rather than being true to God, being true to the ideals of their religion, they get paid off. They get a tax break. That's what it is exactly, right? Just like the corporate oil companies and all, they get a tax break. They don't have to pay taxes. They shut up and they don't rock the boat. They become complicit with basically the rich and powerful who want to stay rich and powerful regardless of what that costs the entire world.
Yeah. I'm reminded, you brought up the tax issue, and I really want to do some research on that now that you've kind of put that in my mind. The only reference I have for that is I was a member of one of the largest churches in the country, in Florida. And the pastor actually was an advisor to George Bush, met George Bush in the White House frequently to advise him. And ironically, he was it was a very conservative church, but he was a very liberal right. He was a, protester in the 60s, very, he'd say, we'd protest if the mashed potatoes were lumpy in the cafeteria kind of guy, And so he was always rocking the boat in this huge congregation. It was very interesting to be a part of. But he would challenge pastors, and he would say, only one church in the history of tax exemption status has lost their exemption. And I haven't researched it, so I can't say for sure. But and I think what may be going on is these rabbis, these priests, these pastors and preachers are scared not of losing their tax exemption status. What they're really scared of is losing, some of their members, or dealing with conflict that may need to happen, or just holding space for conversation that needs to happen, even though it may be contentious in their own congregation, right? And using this tax exempt status as an excuse, right? Of, oh, we can't talk about that, or I'm not going to talk about that. And, I think, this all comes back to our relationship with God and understanding what God is, and God being everything, and God being causality, and this concept of consciousness not being what we think it is. We're not in control of our consciousness. We're not responsible or liable for the words that come out of our mouth, or the things we say or think, nearly like think we are, and are taught we are, to feel shame and blame and, condemnation. And we actually need to express things that we feel that may be wrong, even if they're wrong, right? The solution to bad speech is not tyranny and, the elimination of free speech. The solution to bad speech and wrong thinking is more speech and more conversation, right?
All right, I want to follow
ahead.
up on your point, Josh. I think you're right. It's not just the tax exempt status. It's really that they're afraid of their congregations. So let's pull God into this. And you briefly mentioned it. The idea is, why are they afraid of their congregations? And why are the congregations behaving so evilly, so selfishly, so recklessly, so cruelly, really? And so then the where we are now is, well, they believe that they have a free will. So they believe they're fundamentally responsible for that evil, both the religious leaders and their congregations, the people who would kick them out if these leaders really started to talk about what needs to be talked about, about God's message and God's, commandments. So what needs to happen? As these congregations understand that they're manifesting God's will, that as these congregations experience complete absolution for their evil, that they recognize it's not their fault, then all of a sudden they become much less afraid. They still, probably want to keep their big houses and their stock portfolios and just like all this money and power, which is a different matter that needs to be addressed. But at least they would be, more able to look at their evil and see how it needs to be changed, for the sake of basically what God truly wants.
Yeah. And I want to kind of exonerate the congregations, not to, say that they're being evil or doing wrong in the sense of, evil is used in church so commonly, misused, right? So,
Josh, I got to stop you right there now, because here's the thing. 2% of the American population are vegan. So I'm guessing that way over 95% of every congregation in the United States, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, is eating meat from these factory farms. There's no other way to describe that, but extremely cruel and extremely evil. Sorry.
Well, so yeah, we can take all these issues, and I think, my position is always going to try to be the same because it's my spiritual aspiration, but I fail miserably at it. So Black Lives Matters, climate change, veganism, um, abortion, and we can just kind of play with all these as we go along. We kind of have been, so Black Lives Matter. Both my brothers are cops, um, but I completely believe in, we look at the history in this country, where um, we're all still living the past, and essentially, we haven't had, I don't know. My point being with all these issues is, if we don't get this grasp on these illusions of consciousness and self and free will, right, and even these illusory aspect of human relationship, and we're essentially, God has given us the ability to talk and the ability to have conversation and the ability to share our conscious subjective experience to each other. And if we're stuck in a little congregational religious bubble of, it doesn't matter if it's on the left, on the right, in the middle, or a political bubble on the left, in the middle, or the right, and we aren't exercising, not just exercising, but growing spiritually in our ability to have conversations with people who hold different views, not just to argue the view, but to understand what consciousness really is, and to understand that, these people doing evil, whether they're politicians or bankers that we think is doing evil, could be Saddam Hussein, could be bin Laden, right? Could be abortion clinic doctors, whatever we think is evil. If we don't realize that we have the same conscious in mind that they do in the mechanical sense, the outcome may be different. We may have a different view in the outcome, but if we don't understand it mechanically or, relationally in the sense of causality, we can't really understand what's going on. We can't understand how to let them be able to feel the compassion for the animals they're hurting, how Black people are repressed, or any minority are repressed, or even, different genders are repressed of white people and Caucasians, or what we're doing to the planet. And we can't understand that. And, for me, so we could take any of these instances, and I could say how we can show how we've been making progress, right? So for instance, the last a few episodes ago, I talked about how we have so many problems and so much crime. And George kind of corrected me with kind of the spirit of Steven Pinker's book and a lot of great authors.
It's not like we don't have a lot of crime, Josh. It's that we had so much more like 100, 200 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're making progress, right? So with climate change, like all the lights in my house are LED. So I went from about 5,000 watts of light to, about 50 watts of light, right? That's amazing that's never been made before, that much progress, but we still have so much electric cars. Like, look how many electric cars there are now, right? So this huge progress, right? With animal compassion, right? We're making such huge progress with, the Black Lives Matters.
With animal compassion, no, we're not making any. We're going backwards. We're a lot more cruel to these animals today than we were 1,500 years ago.
When I was a kid, not too long, when I was a teenager in college, even the only choice of milk in the dairy section was cow milk. Now there's almond milk, coconut milk, any kind of milk you can have, right?
Yeah, but they're abusing and torturing many more animals today than they were, 20 years ago.
Well, so many of these issues, you and I share this view, comes from capitalism, right? And, we're still kind of monkeys in trees bartering with this real cruel currency that is only based on, carnal instincts. What's the carnal value of this money, and it doesn't have a spiritual, we don't have a spiritual currency to trade economically like we should. And I think we're evolving to that point, really, with awareness. So the consumer becomes aware of what is the cruelty, how many, was my iPhone made by child slave labor, right? Or, is this food from, even if you're not a vegan, was this free range, and was this certified as not animal cruelty? Was the animal tortured through its life, or was it, killed in the most compassionate, quick way possible, right? And then once you get to that level of being able to feel and, feel compassion for another creature, whether it be an animal or a human or a politician, then you just keep slowly incrementally climbing. I think that's what we're doing with this show.
But
I think that's what this
I think
series is
we're
all
both,
about.
Josh, I think we're both kind of like enmeshed in what's still the problem. And what I mean by that is that we've moved away from God. We in other words, like we have been trying to make the world better for decades, and especially since the 70s, 60s, since we found out about climate change and all, we have failed miserably with our politics. The scientists aren't doing it, the businesses aren't doing anything, the clerics. So basically, what seems to be happening is that God is taking control in a more direct way. God is always in control, but this pandemic is God saying, you need to mend your ways. Just like he did the same thing, she did the same thing with the World War II, World War I, the Civil War. So it's this pandemic, the economic downturn, and who knows what is it will be our next punishment if we don't learn from this one. But let's move from kind of like the politics and the ideology, and the theology, unless the theology is very, very closely tied to God's role in this. Because I think what the missing ingredient is that we may be relying on our own power, the power to communicate, the power to share ideas, to figure out ideas. We may not be sufficiently relying on God, praying to God that God fight our battles for us, like she seems to be doing through this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think we can offer, aside from the politics and the ideology, is like, so many of us feel just helpless. We feel we can't affect policy that much. Our vote barely even counts, right? If it even does count oftentimes, right? But I think with like this economic downturn and, the depression, after around World War II, and the 2008 crash, what's happening, it's such an opportunity to realize that we've been given kind of this false God, this false religion of materialism and consumerism, believing that would make us happy. We all know it well. We all know all of the stories of the people who've won the lottery and then filed bankruptcy and been super depressed afterwards. And the rich are, equally miserable and checking in and out of addiction clinics left and right. So, we don't have to be paupers and poor, but, so much of our lives, it seems, is kind of ruled by this tyranny of materialism and economic success that's way excessive, right? And I think that's where most of our power lies, because that's how if there is a controlling elite or controlling class or even just evil in the world of that nature, that's how they control us, is by controlling how we use our time, how we use our attention, what we're focused on and thinking about, what we're stressed about and anxious about, and I've been the spectrum. I've lived in a giant house on top of a mountain, and I've been, well, I currently am, far from that. And I feel much more at peace and realized, just like Solomon in the Bible and in many spiritual texts, there's this story that, riches is not the key to heaven. It's not the key to heaven on earth, and it's not the key to happiness. And I think that is where we're at, especially with this pandemic, right? And what we're learning
You just brought up a great point. I mean, like, you come from money, I come from money, but we haven't allowed it to corrupt us. In other words, just like Franklin Roosevelt, he was extremely rich, and the rich hated him. And he said, I welcome your hatred, because the man had character, the man had values, and you and I have values. So like, basically it's like we understand the rich because we grew up with the rich. We're part of the rich. And we understand how greedy and selfish they've become. I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention that. But
yeah,
it was excellent.
The real true people of integrity, leaders, I'm thinking of Winston Churchill said the same thing often. Kennedy said the same thing. And of course, many spiritual leaders as well. But, it's, that's how they control us. And when we look at this pandemic and a downturn as an opportunity, And, you can view it as God punishing us, or you could look at it as God taking power away from the elite, from the marketing that's brainwashing us, from the false religions, the false ideologies, right? That are, taking power away from them and giving us opportunities. Now people, can't gather socially as much, but they're taking walks in nature together. They're doing, outdoor activities in God's nature, reconnecting with nature, getting more in shape, right? And getting the body, the biopsychosocial, energetic being, instead of, sitting in a movie theater, eating popcorn and drinking soda, right? There's so many spiritual opportunities in these challenges. And I think, this is our reconnection opportunity with the true nature of God.
All right, I'm gonna see if oh, wait a minute, what am I gonna, hold on. I want to see if I can find all right, I'm trying to,
I'll keep rambling while you're looking for it.
yeah, because basically what I want to do, all right, here we go. I want to get my email and just I want to put up an image that's not on, that's not on my computer, but I got to draw it down from
Okay.
an email.
I'll keep talking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, we started out with about politics, and one thing I want to get into in this part of the series is to have this new view of politics. And, just like we have a new understanding. Used to, we would fight over religions, and a lot of people do try to start wars still over religions, right? But now we have this new understanding of religion is a personal thing. Belief in God is a personal experience, and we shouldn't condemn anybody who's having a different subjective experience, as long as it's positive, beneficial, and helpful for them, and they're not trying to harm anybody else, right? So, this idea that politics is essentially a religion, right? And our mind is being controlled, and our actions, our volition, our vote is being our voice is being stolen from us, essentially, and distilled down to the lowest common denominator of you vote this way or that way. That's your only choice. When in reality, probably everybody listening would identify more with the values of an independent party or the Green Party, but we can't even vote that because that'd be throwing away our vote, right? So essentially, we're forced to be gambling. Our politics is essentially coming down to this, the most unholy, sacrilegious, evil, form of mind and society control there is. And, I think we need to have change. We need to have a call for change. Our congregations, our religions need to be calling for a political system reform that changes that. We have the technology now to have a direct democracy, because we don't have a democracy. We have a republic. That's a lie that we have a democracy. That's revisionist history. A democracy is where you vote for the rules and the laws that are enforced, not for a leader. That's not much different than a monarchy, and a dictatorship, right? But now we have the power, we have the technology to realize that politics is a spiritual calling, right? It should be part of church, and we should have churches that love each other so much. The congregation is able to love each other in the congregation so much that there is not just conservatives and Republicans and far right, but also left and far left and Democrats in the same congregation. And they love each other, and they love this experience of getting to know God and causality and consciousness deeper so much that they're fascinated by each other, and they're fascinated by what their differences teach them about themselves and their own cognitive biases, their own cognitive dissonance. And when this happens, what will happen is each family will become so much stronger, because these same types of contentions, these same types of, trauma and struggle are happening, that happen between the parties, are happening in all of our families, right? Where we blame each other for the way we think or the actions, or, if it's anger comes out of somebody's mouth or something, we're taught by not just the religious paradigm that we're under, but also the political paradigm, to blame that person. That's that person's fault. They're an idiot. They're retarded. They need to burn in hell. We need to just wipe them off the face of the earth, right? we're carrying that over to our own families, right? Maybe not consciously, maybe not verbally, but certainly subconsciously. But when we have this new higher understanding, this higher spiritual awareness of what consciousness is, that free will is an illusion. Free will, these illusions have, not ironically, religion and politics have denied these illusions, denied that they exist, and exploited them at the same time. So take, for instance, in religion, the concept of sin. We understand sin, so you shouldn't sin, but yet in the Bible, it says that everybody's a sinner, right? So that is denying that there's the illusion of free will and then exploiting it and blaming the person for, saying you don't have free will because everybody's a sinner, so there's no way you can't be a sinner, and then blaming you for sinning, right? And the same thing happens in politics and this bipartisan nonsense. And I think we're ready for this spiritual evolution and revolution to occur. And, I spend a lot of time on college campuses and hearing with the next generation, how they are being enlightened through the internet, through this honest conversation with each other. When college kids go to school, they don't care, they don't fight, they don't make their own cliques. They learn they're there to learn. Their mind is growing and expanding, and in a way from us older adults, they have this childlike amazement and wonder for life, right? That we've lost as older adults. And, I think it's very clear that the next generation is going to do this. And I think as the elders, and the more wise older adults, it's our job to, realize the mistakes we've made. We didn't have the internet when we were growing up.
All right, Josh, we've got almost about a minute. I couldn't find that email.
Okay. We'll do it next. We can do it next episode.
Yes. But
so wrap us up, George.
Yeah, thanks. Everything you're saying, makes sense. But again, we're both just veering away from God. I mean, it was a brilliant, I can't take credit for it because it wasn't my idea. God gave it to me, but it was a brilliant idea to have this series on God, because people really need to understand the nature of God, and religions aren't doing this. They just who knows what they do. But anyway, let's do another episode, okay? And let's just really, if I veer off God, you got to call me on it, and vice versa. Let's try to get this
because everything's God. So everything we're talking about is God. We just have to use the word a lot to tie it in and make our brains get it.
Absolutely, and God is not allowing us to get it. We got to we got to acknowledge that. So, all right. So, Josh, is an excellent episode. Again, we will record the next one. I guess is episode 17. I guess once we're done with this one, and we're going to follow up on this. Staying with God. Thanks for watching, everyone.